Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I am, on behalf of EURIX and AMS-IX, I would like to welcome you all to our joint webinar, Pandemic versus IXPs. I am very happy to have you all tuned in, and now I would like to introduce you to our moderator, Nurani Nimpuno, Head of Engagement at LINX. Hope you enjoy the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Enrica. Has already been said, my name is Nurani Nimpuno and I'm the Head of Global Engagement at LINX. Welcome to all of you. It's good to see so many people here. And today we have a really interesting panel for you called The Pandemic versus IXPs. And this is actually a panel discussion that's part of a series of discussions hosted at the EURIX with AMS-IX, called Is the Internet Broken? And in today's webinar, we're going to have a discussion about how the pandemic has particularly affected IXPs and the internet. So with that, I'd like to go through a few housekeeping and guideline rules. So first of all, do feel free to use the chat function to chat amongst yourselves. We do like it when it becomes a little bit interactive. If you have any questions, make sure to put that in the Q&A and I'll make sure to get that to the panelists. Please do that throughout the discussion and I can see if I can slot it in, and if not, we'll take it at the end. And I also recommend everyone to use the gallery mode if you haven't done that already, and that way you can see all the panelists at the same time. So, first of all, we will simply have a discussion, so there's not that much of an agenda to go through. But as I said, we have an interesting panel today, and we've tried to include different perspectives from different parts of the world. So we have AMS-IX Caribbean, which is in Curaçao in the Caribbean. I'm from LINX, and then we have NetNode, which is based in Stockholm, Sweden, and operates exchange points in Sweden and Denmark. We have Batelco from Manama IXP in Bahrain, and then also DKIX Mumbai. So the panelists today are Ajay Kumar, who's Chief Information Officer at DKIX India. We have LM Lars Mikael Jordbäck, who's the CEO of NetNode. We have Nico Scheper, who's Business Development Manager for AMS-IX Caribbean, and Taha Hussain, Senior Product Manager at Batelco Global Services. And like I said, my name is Nurani Nimpuno. So with that, I would actually like to dive into the discussion. I hope you can see all our eminent panelists here today. So I'm going to start by setting the scene a little bit and talk about how the pandemic has actually affected the various IXPs. But let's start by looking at where these IXPs are located and what the situation in 2020 was like for them as a country. So I'm going to start actually with whoever's, I'm going to go clockwise on my screen, which is not the same as yours. So LM, can I ask you to describe what the 2020 situation was like in Sweden?
Thank you, Nurani. Yes, the situation with regards to COVID in 2020 in Sweden has been very different, I would say, from at least different from a normal year. When it comes to lockdown, Sweden hasn't been in a formal lockdown like many other countries have been in Europe. The country has been more or less open. There has been a lot of volunteering from companies and people that can, should, and is working from home. But still, businesses is open. When it comes to restaurants and stuff like that, is open, but with shorter time periods, shorter opening hours, and a lot of people are working remotely. Essentially, it started in mid-March, and then both Sweden and Norway and Denmark closed down. Border crossings has been difficult, but in mid-March, a lot of people moved back home with their normal work and started working from home. But apart from that, everything is working pretty well. And we almost say business as usual, but not really usual, hopefully.
Okay, thank you for that. Nico, can I turn to you to describe Curaçao?
Yes, I believe I'm unmuted now. Well, in general, in the Caribbean and specifically in Curacao, it was a different situation than LM just informed us about in Sweden. We had a very strict lockdown actually in Curacao, which meant that borders were all closed, like the airport and the port borders. Those were 100% closed, which means that being an island state, you are actually isolated from the rest of the world because no planes coming in or out and no vessels or cruise ships or whatsoever coming in and out. So schools were closed, government was closed, restaurants, businesses, everything was closed. It was like spooky on the streets, let's say, because there was actually no one outside. We were also locked down in our houses. We were not allowed to go up. However, luckily that was a short time. After that, after the lockdown, let's say, restaurants opened again, schools are open. However, government is still closed and government businesses, services are still to be done remotely. As I said, schools are open, so and businesses are open again. So families are going out there again to work and to school, and that helps a lot. There is still a curfew in place, but that's only from 11 o'clock in the evening onwards till the early morning hours when people are at home anyway. So that doesn't really have an impact. So that's where we are today, and the vaccine program started this week. So actually things are looking pretty good from a Curacao point of view. However, the issue we are facing is the global lockdown. Because if we have this global lockdown, tourists are actually simply not traveling, coming to the Caribbean to support our economy. So although we have no lockdown anymore, we are still isolated a bit from all these tourists coming in like they used to do. So that's where we are today, Murani.
Yeah, thank you for that. And we'll come back to that actually and see how that actually affects the internet operations and the operations of the IXP. So Taha, can I turn to you to describe the situation in Bahrain?
Bahrain, I would say, global pandemic. We had times of lockdown. For the first wave, we had like supermarkets and open, but normal business like restaurants, all closed. Luckily, it came at the beginning at time of end of semesters and everybody was on vacation anyway. But then when school started, I would say Bahrain was ready for it because we have fiber reaching nearly 90% of the homes. So it's a small island, it's covered with fiber, everybody's connected. So and internet service is very good in Bahrain. However, some people had issues because of limited number of machines at homes or things like there are 5 students in a household or 4 students, but there are 2 laptops or 2 PCs. That created some problems. But in general, things continued fine and people started to manage. Schools are still not open. We are now hit with the second wave, and the government is managing it somehow. We had a very good management from the government because they even supported the economy. Half of the salaries of the private sector was paid by the government. That was a great thing in Bahrain. I think it was one of a kind in the world. And the government stayed at home, let's work, but everybody's paid fine, and the economy continued normal.
Okay, yeah, thank you. You were breaking up a little bit, but I think we got the gist of it. I think most of we heard most of what you were saying. I'll turn to you, AJ. I mean, India is a big country, so would you mind telling us what the situation was like in 2020 for you?
Yeah. Namaste from India. So in India, we have seen the complete lockdown. The school was closed, all businesses was closed, all government offices was closed. Thereafter, after few months, we have seen the unlock phases. So nowadays, government is open, the businesses are open, the school is also open partially. From some states, fifth onwards, school, the children are going to school. From some state, we see still lockdown again. In Maharashtra, a few days back, the government has decided to start lockdown because the cases was increasing. So, but in India, complete lockdown was there, and only internet was there to assist and do the communication. And the government of India declared internet as an essential service. So, as an essential service, we were able to serve our customers. And luckily, before starting this pandemic, our infrastructure was upgraded. So we were able to accommodate the all requirement from the content side as well as the customer sides. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's very interesting, and you touch upon an interesting point there, because I think, and that's the part about being considered an essential service. I know, for example, so IX organized very early in the pandemic, organized these knowledge sharing sessions between IXPs, and Italy in Europe was one of the very first hit by the pandemic, and for us in other parts of the of Europe, it was a bit of a wake-up call to hear what was happening in Italy and some of the challenges they had. And one of the challenges they had was simply the practical challenge of getting to data centers and moving around and getting services rolled out that required physical people in place when there was a lockdown. But you managed to keep services going because you were actually considered an essential service.
Yes. So government has issued the essential passes to our staff. So being an essential service, our staff can move, and the data center staff was there within the data center or within a few meters of the data center. So I have seen India, the data center was very supportive. The staff was very supportive. If we have not opted the remote hand support, they have provided the support. Later on, they decided to the bill or not bill, but they have given the support. So
yeah, that's interesting.
As a internet provider, we were able to provide the good service to all customers, because suddenly we see few hundred times the demand from the content side as well as the ISP side. I have seen first time the growth of content few hundred times from the content side, OTT side. Every people was working from home, then the demand of the movies also increased.
Yes.
And work from home, everyone has to be online from the home. So being the internet service provider and reliable resilience, we were able to provide good service to our customers.
Yes, that's interesting. I think so. One of the things that came up very early in the pandemic, I saw several articles saying, will the internet manage to cope with this new load, or will the internet break, and there were a few alarmist articles like that. And it became very clear very early on that the internet did not break, of course. And the internet being a resilient network and having ways of routing away around bottlenecks, it actually proved to be very flexible and handle the load. But that doesn't mean that they're not weak spots, of course. But I'll come back to that. I wanted just to to loop back to the IXP part of it and look at what you were saying there also about being able to access the data centers. I know, Ellen, if I can turn to you, I know you were saying in Sweden there wasn't a lockdown, so you didn't have struggles getting to data center. But I know that NetNode also was prepared in other ways to manage the surge of internet traffic that came on. Would you want to speak a little bit about that?
I can touch that a little bit. I mean, as I said earlier, we had no problem getting into the data centers in Sweden or in national, but we had a little bit of issues where it was at least unclear with border crossing, since we operate in the Scandinavian countries, and getting into Norway and Denmark from Sweden could be tricky. Then we had a good cooperation with the government and also considered critical infrastructure and everything. So it worked okay for us, but it was always a little bit on the tense when we're sending a technician to the data center in Denmark, and is they are allowed in the country, but they were, and it worked out pretty well. But we also tried very hard in normal before this pandemic struck, and we're very happy for that we do a lot of pre-cabling. So we essentially, when we build out a switch in the data center, we pre-cable it to the meet me room fully, and in that way we are able to do a lot of turning up new customers or upgrading without actually getting there or getting help just from the smart hands from the data centers. And that is something that we're very, very happy that we started to do before this pandemic, because we have had a lot of help during this time.
Yeah, of course. And then, of course, I think it's also important to point out that the operators that are connected to the exchange points, they have a little bit of capacity as well. They're not constantly hitting the 100% port utilization, because of course that would make everything very vulnerable. So yes, yeah. Go ahead.
I can also add on top of that we, as in many other countries, we had also a lot of pressure and discussions in media and politicians that was afraid that the internet wouldn't cope from the beginning. We are in a slightly lucky situation. We have a very good internet infrastructure in general in the Scandinavian countries, but we decided from NetNode's point of view that we should help out also to the ISP. So we offered everybody a free upgrade for 3 months if they needed, and a lot of our customers were happy on tagging along with that. And that also helped, of course, with the ones that were on the edge of upgrading anyway. We saw that the traffic pattern shifted quite a bit in the beginning when people were starting working from home. Typically, we have our peak in the evenings, and typically the biggest peak is a evening when there is a release of a new version of a game or something like that. And that meant that we have a lot of capacity for internet for working from home during daytime, because everything is dimensioned for the peak. And we were happy with that, but we also saw an increase in the evenings, as Ajay said, when people are starting looking more on TV when they cannot go out and go to the restaurants and stuff like that.
Yeah, yes. So I wanted to turn to both Taha and Nico, because I think what has been described so far, if you look at the NetNode example, for example, where there is good fiber build out to the home, and there's also good local content. I think, Taha, you were describing that you have good fiber to the home build out, but I think there are other challenges in terms of where the content sits, and that's maybe something you share with Nico. So I'd like to hear both of your perspectives on, when the traffic increase happened and when there was a demand for content, how did that affect the traffic patterns in your country? If I start with you, Taha, and then maybe you can pick up and describe your situation, Nico.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, in Bahrain, we had a lot of schooling. The government schooling was all based on Microsoft. Did a lot of traffic to Microsoft. We also had a lot of demand on other applications like the gaming and others, but these contents are all located in Europe. And for us to reach them, we have to go 120 to 150 milliseconds on submarine cables or crossing the lands, which are very expensive. But the increase of demand made the per meg cost go lower, but still, it's a very long distance. And the service level, do you hear me well?
We don't hear you very well, but I think we hear you okay, but we can see maybe if we can do something to improve it.
I'm sorry, I'll try to fix that. But when I say the traffic is 120 milliseconds, it impacts the classes and the lectures that are given by the teachers, and that created some sort of suffering. In addition to that, the activation of extra bandwidth to all these countries is very expensive, and it was time consuming as well. There was some contents that came to this region and hosted, whether in Dubai, in Muscat, and in Bahrain as well. There are large content providers that came to this region, but they came with smaller pops. Most of their contents are still residing in Europe, US, or in Singapore, and the distance is too high to have good quality. Still, with the caches and the pops that we got into this region, the performance became much better, and people started connecting to the local IXs or regional IXs to get most of their traffic from the region so that they have better services. That increased the local traffic in this region. But still, as you mentioned, the content is still a challenge to bring the content to this region. And I spoke to many of these content providers, and they are suffering because of high demand, and they cannot cope with the load that's coming to them. And that's why their plans to come to our region are taking time. Okay, so we'll have to wait for that, but for the time being, we'll have to pull as much as we can traffic from Europe and try to find the shortest path to reach these countries.
No, I think, Nico, you have a similar experience. You're an island. There's not a lot of content on the island, and I know some of the traffic takes some crazy routes to get to you. Do you want to describe how that situation was for you?
Yeah, let's talk a bit about the crazy routes. We typically in the Caribbean have like 26 different island states, and basically all content is US centric. So that means that there is a lot of traffic going back and forth between the Caribbean and the US. Actually, that's the similar case for the Latin American countries, a lot of Latin American countries. So there is a lot of subsea cables and terrestrial networks connecting the US with the Caribbean and also with Latin America. From a Caribbean point of view, that means up to like 2,000 kilometers to between Miami and the southern part of the Caribbean, which is about 60 milliseconds of latency. So that has its impact on the performance of and the experience of the end users, right? Okay, then we deployed IXs in the Caribbean. The added value of the IXs is that basically in the Caribbean, we managed to get about 50%, up to 50% of the traffic locally on the IXs. That varies per island state, but let's work with the 50% for a moment. That means that for that 50%, we managed to get the performance and the experience of the end users up because of the latency being diminished to like, as I tend to call it, single digits. I'm getting feedback from some ISPs that the latency is down to about 2 to 3 milliseconds instead of the 60 that they were experiencing before. So we managed to get 50% of that content down. And of course, what we would like to do is see that we get that 50 up to like, if possible, 100%, right? So but that, of course, is a business decision of all the companies involved. I hear Taha is struggling also with getting the CDNs to move their content or cache their content locally. Well, we are working on the same thing, and my experience is that it is basically a business decision of members of the IX, but also international content providers, whether they see a business case in caching it locally. So that's basically how we look at it. And I also want to go back to the data center question that you asked before. We in the Caribbean, also the governments classified internet as a essential service. So we did get the opportunity to be granted a free pass to travel to the data centers. However, in Curacao, I didn't feel the experience to visit the data center, as we could. There was no need for it, and if necessary, we could work with remote hands. So, although the data centers locally increased their access policy, let's say they kind of restricted it. Still, we were when and if necessary work with remote hands. So that worked fine, actually. Credits to the data centers.
Yeah, indeed. So so just to pick up on a few things there. So and I'll throw this question to any one of you who wants to pick it up. So do you think that the pandemic highlighted, well, I think it highlighted the need for good internet. I think we can all agree on that. But do you think it highlighted the need or made this case stronger for local content or having content served locally? And if so, you know, apart from just the increased awareness of it, were there efforts made to get that, successful efforts or not, by the community, by the content providers themselves, by government? Then I'd also like to ask you, because a few of you picked that up about you know, being essential services and essential workers. Of course, that is the result of relationships with government and regulator for a long time, and it highlights the need to actually educate governments and regulators of the need for well-working infrastructure. Does anyone want to speak about any of that, the government relationships and the essential workers part, or then also this need for local content and any developments that happen there? Yes, Taha, please.
Yeah, I hope the voice is better now.
Much better, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. The need for local traffic is really big. It's very important for all the countries that surrounding us. We need the contents to be localized because, and I think all the content providers know that and know it very well, and they are pressuring the telecom providers to host them at lowest cost. And I would say, as a telecom provider, I feel like they are playing with the fact that there is need for their contents to get everything for free. Okay, they are putting a lot of pressure on us. They say, if you want, you can come to my content in this country or that country. They don't want to invest much. They want to put all the investment on the telecom providers because they know that they care about their user experience at the end of the day. Okay. And for our region, yes, we have invested. We have invested in getting the contents. The government of Bahrain has spent a lot of money to get AWS as one of the largest content providers to host one of the biggest POPs in Bahrain. And the governments of this region are also spending with other content providers to come to this region because user experience is the number one factor for having stable services. And all the internet service providers need to have that as attraction for their customers. So yeah, localizing the service is very important, but it has everybody has to take a share of the load. The government is taking here, the government is taking share of the load. The telecom operators are taking a share of the load. Content providers also need to take responsibility as well as very large organizations to take share of the load, not only drop it on the governments and the telecom providers or the IXPs. We try to get to the contents through remote peering, but they don't accept that. They won't just come to us, spend the money and do whatever you want to reach to us. Yeah, that's very important thing. Aside of
Indeed.
that, yeah, if I come to the regulatory, um, this region is not that mature in telecom like Europe and Asia, and of course US. This region has been always kind of monopolies running the show. Now it's the telecom regulators are trying their best to make it free market. We are trying to start carrier neutral data centers around the region, and IXPs that are treating every uh, internet service provider equally, but we are still crawling. We are not there yet.
Thank you. AJ, please go ahead.
So India is a vast country, and we has a big market for everyone, and government is very supportive. So recently we have seen that few state government has released the data center policy. Today I have seen one news. One of our the hosting company has been taken stake by the one international data center provider. Few months back, other company came to India to invest in the data center. So in India, we see a lot of opportunities is there. And as an internet service provider, as an internet exchange provider, we decided to go to the other metros. We were only in the Mumbai market when the pandemic was there. So now we have expanded to Delhi market, and in Mumbai we have presence in 8 data centers all over the metro. Similarly, in Delhi we have expanded to 4 data centers, and Chennai 2 data center, and Kolkata. So we looking into the pandemic situation and the localization of the content, we have opened the exchanges, and we see the content provider as well as the ISPs are supporting the initiative of the DKIX interweb.
That's great, and I think it's interesting because it also tells the story of how IXPs can be catalysts for other things. The IXP in itself is not a magic solution; it's just a hub to interconnect networks. But the presence of an IXP can actually generate or can put in motion developments. It becomes a natural place to host services, to put content, and for other networks to interconnect, obviously. So, so I think, we've heard many stories. I know that the traffic went up a lot at NetNode, at Links where I work. It went up to 40% over the last year, which is an enormous increase. And I think we hear a lot of stories of this increased load and this increased traffic. And but I think it's also important to keep in mind that that's not necessarily the case in all countries. So I know, for example, there's the story of the Ugandan IXP. They were actually saying that their traffic went down simply because they do not have good fiber build out to the home. So when people had to work from home, they then had to, they were working from the mobile networks, and that was not, and those were not networks that were connected to the IXP. I also know, so Nika, you mentioned, for example, this because there's a global pandemic, the tourism to Curaçao has almost ceased completely. How has that affected the internet usage and the consumption of content and services in Curaçao?
We did experience about 25% of traffic growth in Curacao. I believe that is across in the Caribbean. So we did have a growth, which is a good thing. However, I think the growth could have been much bigger if the tourism industry wouldn't have been affected like it is. You know, tourism and the hospitality sector is a big pillar of the economy in the Caribbean, of course. Massive numbers of people / tourism would travel, is normally traveling, you know, stay over tourists, as we call it, by plane, or cruise tourism by all these cruise ships. Having you know, on each and every cruise ship is like 3,000 to 4,000 people, you know. Once that cruise ship gets on land in the port, it's immediately, and you have 2-3 cruise ships at the same time, it's immediately about 6,000 people additionally, up to 10,000 people additionally, if you reckon the crew also with that, hitting the internet immediately. And that's on a daily basis. In small island states, that is an important part of the internet traffic. Whether it goes through satellites that these cruise companies are working with, or it goes through local networks up to the internet. But all that is pretty much vanished at the moment still because of the global lockdown. You know, although we are slowly but surely opening up again as Caribbean, there is still a global lockdown. You know, so it's awaiting the tourism to pick up again and see what will happen. But I believe the traffic growth could have been bigger if that sector wasn't vanished like it did. So from and then if I may, from you just touched the regulatory part of it. From a regulatory point of view, I know that the government is actually really monitoring the performance of the ISP networks at this moment, rather than actually monitoring what's happening with the IXP. How they're looking at the IXP is more like, how can the IXP facilitate the performance and the experience of the end users and coping with the traffic growth. You know, so there's not so much focus on regulating the IXP, more actually looking into how can we facilitate, how can we help with the deployment of IXPs in the region, increasing the user experience actually.
No, that's a positive outcome if that is the case.
Yeah.
Understanding
actually all IXPs in the region has been deployed with the assistance of the government, like Taha is saying, you know, government is playing a key role, even in the funding of deployment of IXs in the region. The governments, all of the governments, as regulators, has played a key role in deploying the IXs, and they still are actually. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. So I want to turn to LM now, because I know that at the start of the pandemic, like you said, there was a lot of interest and a lot of in you know, will the internet cope, will the IXP cope, etc. And I know that you released a few blog posts about that. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and what you saw?
I can do that. I mean, we have. As you know, and like the other colleagues here have said, we have a pretty good relationship with the government and have had so for quite some time. And we started to see when this was happening, there was a lot of worrying from both normal people out there, from media. We heard it from the government, we heard it from the politicians around the question, will the internet cope? Can the business continue to run? Can people continue to work? And how it will affect it? And we saw that there was a lot of misinformation that was presented because they looked at how it looked in another country or in another part of the world and say, no, look, it didn't work, this is a crisis, etc., etc. And we decided we have to step up here and talk about the small issues that we see happen and say that this is business as usual. And we did that for with a daily blog post for little more than a week. And we got a lot of interest, and it was quite a boring blog series because it was like, yeah, everything works, business as usual. And we show that the traffic is growing and we can handle it, and ISPs can handle it, and so forth. That being said, there have been an uptick of another thing that we know nowadays, and that is the internet is very, very critical. And the internet is very critical for the society, even more than before. And therefore, we have started to work more with the other telcos and our customers and our partners and the government to see if we can make the internet even more robust, because there is still things happening, not necessarily in the IXs and in the core network of the telcos, but in the services or the end sites or some authentication issues where it's not really ready for being a prime time service. And we need to work together with the community to bring internet up a notch even further and make sure it is the critical infrastructure. It's actually, it behaves as the critical infrastructure it actually is.
Yes, thanks for that. So, we're in the last quarter of this hour, and I want to invite questions from the audience as well. So those of you who are attending, please feel free to ask your questions. But I'd like to look forward a little bit, and I have 3 questions for you. And you can pick up all 3 or one of them or none of them if you don't want to. So my first question is, if you look back over the year, were there any bottlenecks or weak spots or even broken parts in the ecosystem that you could identify that needed fixing, or that didn't get fixed, or that was still a struggle over the last year? So that's the first one. The second is, what are the lessons that you've learned from this year? Good and bad lessons. It can be lessons that things that you've come to an understanding about or gained an understanding of, or things that you would do differently if this pandemic hit again, or God forbid that we would be in this pandemic for another 5 years or 10 years. And then in the very end, I would like us to focus on maybe some more positive aspects and looking forward in the future. But let's start with those 2 parts. Does anyone want to pick up any of those?
Well, I would like to pick up on the looking at the positive side of things, but I don't know if you want to discuss the first 2 first, but
I think we have to start with the negative so we can end on the positive.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
I promise to get to you then on the positive. So yes, Ellen, did you have something?
I mean, the things that was a good lessons learned, and that is that we rely a lot of the community. I mean, one of the things that happened by itself was that there was a self-organizing, both in a formal way where it was actually organized through the government and the crisis management and stuff like that, but also on a grassroots level from actual internet technicians that put together contact list, contact information, talk to each other and said, hey, if you need somebody that can patch this in this city or in this area, please contact us. And as you explained in the beginning of the meeting, I mean, the IXPs in your IX got together and also shared information. And I think we need to be even better on this in the future and be able to utilize it if something worse happens. Currently, we have been lucky because logistics, both when it comes to hardware and actually getting people on site, even if it has been a little bit more troublesome, has still worked fairly well in all over the world. But if it's something that this would be even worse and the supply chain would break down, or there would be even more difficult getting border crossings and stuff like that, then we will really need these kind of things.
Anyone else?
That was what I thought about. Yep.
positive thing this pandemic has given that in India, work from home culture was not there in the government or in the private sector. So now that culture has come. You do not have to travel to office altogether. You can do work from home also. So that is the positive thing and positive learning for this from this pandemic. And for the planning perspective, we as a decade center are planning at least 3 to 4 years ahead. If the demand is coming, we are able to serve the customers.
Interesting. I will turn to you, Nico, because I think even though LM picked up the negative question, he turned it into something positive. So, Nico, please share your positive story, and I see that there've been a few questions in the chat, so we'll try to get to them as well. Go ahead, Nico.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it short. What I'm really looking forward to is that this whole pandemic is fueling actually the Caribbean to getting more digital. So we as citizens, we experience that the government is starting new digital services. Banks are now communicating with their customers by simple WhatsApp messages to opening new accounts. That was unthinkable before, right? Supermarkets, online shopping was unknown in the Caribbean and now possible. Restaurants ordering online is only recently became possible in the Caribbean. There was simply no demand for it before, but now there is. So schools are starting to look into online schooling and training. So all that is I mean, it's nothing really new for mankind, but it is still new for the Caribbean. So what I'm looking forward to is that we will be generating real local traffic with this. So when we talk about local traffic, actually today it is international content that is being locally cached, and we call that local traffic. But real local traffic is once we start generating traffic locally. And for the Caribbean, that's pretty new, because all the content till today is actually international content that is being consumed locally. So I'm really looking forward to the community generating local content through all these new digital services. And the pandemic has really encouraged it, is really driving it, actually fueling it, actually, and that will lead to more traffic and more added value for the IXs. So I find that quite a positive thing coming out of this pandemic, actually.
Indeed. No, I think you described the Caribbean, but I think that's actually the case all over the world, even in very well-developed countries where the infrastructure is good and highly digitalized communities. I think this pandemic has pushed that development even further in those countries as well. So I see that Yolandi is asking, since the spike of COVID on the IXPs, have you seen the traffic stabilize or drop? And she's also asking, have you seen an increase of new members joining, or has the traffic increase mainly been from existing members? Anyone wants to pick up on that?
Yeah, in India, we have not seen any drop of the traffic. It's growing and the customers are increasing day by day. So we have not seen after the unlock, the traffic is dipping. So still we see that we are in the growth mode.
Actually, even I would say in our region, the demand increased. Some cable cuts here and there. I was going to talk about that earlier. The diversity of the links was something that was prepared for and saved us at the time of load. Our network was sized for 60% of the use, so our utilization was maxing to 60%. So when the pandemic happened, we jumped to 70s and 80s, but we were kind of prepared for that because we were having a relaxed network sizing. But the demand increased, and it increased heavily. We see like nearly double the amount of traffic generated. during the pandemic. And I think that's all because everybody is sitting behind a computer all the time.
As we are right now. I see another interesting question actually from Hariharan Jayaraman. I hope I pronounced that correctly. So it's a good question. It says, I'd like to know if the unprecedented change in the traffic last year made the IXP software tools, such as network and analytics, to effectively maintain or optimize your network. Have you implemented any changes in terms of automation or analysis or monitoring or remote hands or anything like that because of the pandemic?
Well, I know we are busy implementing and automating new tools for communication with the customers and ordering, provisioning, billing, and all that. But that is not so much about only the pandemic, but it is actually an ongoing effort in digitalization of the IXs.
Yeah, same thing with the DKIX in India. We are in the phase of automation, doing the implementation of the Apollon software. So, but that is not related to the pandemic. So
Okay.
automation is always good for the removing the manual errors.
Right, yeah. I think Ellen, were you about to say something as well?
No, I was more not so much affecting the management and more in network analytics side. We only dimension when we build a network. We make sure that we just handle the traffic. We don't look at what kind of traffic it is. We don't do any particular analysis of what kind of traffic. So we just build out based on the peak of the bandwidth for the traffic. So we haven't looked into new tools for network analytics per se. When it comes to automation, of course, we do that as well as everybody else and increasing it more and more over time.
Okay, thank you. So with that, I'd like to use the last 5 minutes to look forward, and I would like to go around the room and actually ask you all to think about what will the future of IXPs, internet infrastructure, traffic flows in terms of content and cloud and data center management, what will the future look like, both because of the pandemic, but also because of the development that we're seeing? If you could paint a picture, say in 5 years' time, this is what it will look like. Could we try to go around the room and do that? I'll let, if someone feels the urge to start, then yes, Taha, please go ahead.
I think the pandemic has changed the lifestyle for good. They say what CEOs and CFOs could not do to digitalize the life of or the enterprise life, the pandemic has done. Everybody is now going digital, and I think this is going to be the norm even after the pandemic. We're not going to go back to the times before the pandemic. We're going to be staying in the time where everything is digitized. Everybody, I mean, to an extent, even in my company, people are talking about once the pandemic is over, we want to work 2 days in office and 3 days at home, for example. Things like that. Things are there to stay. The lifestyle has changed. Everything has changed. So the demand for traffic, for internet, for data will increase continuously, and the data centers and IXPs will have to work together and interconnect with each other and make the traffic flow simple and easy for everyone.
Okay, thank you. Next, who feels? AJ, please go ahead.
Yeah, I can say if there is no internet exchange, then there will be no internet. So internet is there due to the internet exchange are there. So future is the internet exchange for the digitalization, for the moving content fast, and so everywhere the local exchanges should be there. That's all.
Good point. Yeah, so the future is more exchange points and improved interconnection. Nico, please.
Yeah, I see ample room for improvement and digitalization in the Caribbean. So looking in 5 years from now, if I don't speak about networks and IXPs and whatever not, and more looking at the community we are living in the Caribbean, I believe that in 5 years' times, we will have a much more digitalized economy and community than we have today. And of course, that needs to be supported and facilitated by IXs, ISPs, subsea cables, all parties involved, regulatory bodies, you name it. But I do see that happening in the coming 5 years. I hope it will happen.
Thank you. LM.
Yeah, internet and digitization is going to continue to increase and be more and more important. And we, both the IXPs and the telcos, we will be around, we'll make sure it works, but we also need to step up our game and make sure it's more resilient and more robust than ever before, because it's getting more and more important. I mean, if you're looking at stuff like power, for instance, even if that is tremendous important for us to be able to run our network, you can still go out and buy a generator or a genset and handle it locally if it fails. It's going to be really, really hard to just buy a backup internet connection that works without IXPs and without telcos. We still need to be there and make sure the service always work and ever work, even more in the future.
Okay, so that's a challenge to all of us. It's clear that exchange points play an important role in being the driver of this, or at least one of the important players, but it's also a challenge to all of us then to be that driver and to be part of that change and part of that future scenario. Okay, well, I think with that, I think it has brought us to the top of the hour. I don't know about you, but I very much enjoyed this discussion. It was great to hear the different perspectives and very diverse views from the very diverse parts of the world as well. For me, it was really informative, and it's interesting, I mean, working for an exchange point myself, to see that the similarities between the challenges we have, but also the differences. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from each other. And I'm very grateful for the EUR-IX to actually for being the forum for this and the knowledge sharing center of this. So thank you very much for that. So with that, I would like to thank all the panelists, AJ, LM, Nico, Taha. Thank you so much for agreeing to be part of this panel and sharing your knowledge and your perspective. Thank you to all the participants, of course, and thank you to the EUR-IX for facilitating and hosting this session. It's been my great pleasure to moderate this. I hope you've enjoyed it as well. So with that, I will say thank you. I'll say keep an eye out on the EUR-IX website for other sessions. There are lots of other ones that I'm not involved with that I know that they're hosting, and there's a lot of great content coming out. And with that, I'll say thank you and goodbye. Be safe, stay healthy, take care, and let's hope we can see each other in person at some time in the very short future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nurani.
Thank you.